By 1825, Russia had secured its position as a world power. Its victory over Napoleon had demonstrated a scale of military might that few other nations could match. But underneath that projection of strength, a movement was growing. Russian intellectuals and army officers were forming secret societies, plotting to dismantle the absolute autocracy they served. When Emperor Alexander's death led to a confused royal succession, these societies launched a military coup in the heart of the capital. This Decembrist revolt brought thousands into the city square to demand a constitutional government. The new Tsar, Nicholas I, used loyalist troops to break the uprising. He hanged the ringleaders and sent the survivors into internal exile in Siberia, while enforcing a rigid state doctrine of orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality to block the spread of liberal ideas. By violently silencing his critics, Nicholas maintained the appearance of a stable, unified empire. But this internal silence only masked the structural flaws that were continuing to deepen. Nicholas projected Russian power abroad by crushing liberal revolts across Europe and expanding the empire's borders into Persia. His willingness to act as a continental policeman earned him the nickname the Gendarme. Yet this military aggression happened while Russia was falling behind. While its rivals were building massive railway networks and industrializing, the Russian economy remained largely frozen in the past. This chart of the 1857 census shows over 22 million people, more than a third of Russia, were serfs. Slaves in all but name, they were forced to work their master's land, forbidden from moving, and their status legally passed to their children. Because the empire relied on this immobile agricultural workforce, it could not develop the labor pool required for a modern economy. Russia was geographically massive, but its foundations were increasingly brittle. That fragility was exposed when Russia's push against the Ottoman Empire triggered a war with Britain and France. For the first time in decades, the Russian army faced modern, industrial powers. Allied forces landed in Crimea and besieged the naval base at Sevastopol. The fortress fell after a grueling bombardment the defenders could not match. With its capital blockaded and its Black Sea fleet destroyed, Russia was forced to sign a peace treaty that ended its plans for southern expansion. The defeat in Crimea proved that peasant manpower was no longer enough to win a war. To survive, the empire had to modernize its industry, its infrastructure, and its social structure. Nicholas I died during the conflict, leaving his son Alexander II to manage the fallout. Alexander realized that if the state did not change from above, it would eventually be overthrown from below. In 1861, he abolished serfdom by imperial decree. This act legally freed tens of millions of people and earned Alexander the title of the Liberator. However, the decree did not provide the freed serfs with the resources to be truly independent. Most remained trapped in poverty, burdened by debt, and still tied to the land they had worked for generations. Alexander also created the zemstva, provincial assemblies that gave local citizens a voice in managing education, healthcare, and social welfare for the first time. While these assemblies could build schools or roads, they held no power over national policy. Alexander had decentralized local administration, yet he kept every final decision in his own hands. The legal status of the people had shifted, but the Tsar's absolute control of the state remained. To maintain its global prestige, the empire continued to expand south into Central Asia, conquering Turkestan and entering a geopolitical rivalry with Britain known as the Great Game. At the same time, the government managed its finances by selling Alaska to the United States for $7.2 million, a territory that was becoming too expensive to defend. This was also a cultural golden age for Russia. Writers like Leo Tolstoy, whose masterpiece War and Peace was published in 1869, achieved a level of global literary influence that rivaled the great powers of the West. Territorial gains and cultural triumphs gave the empire the appearance of a thriving superpower, but these successes were disconnected from the growing radicalization of the Russian intellectuals. Radical political groups were increasingly frustrated. They saw Alexander's reforms as a way to preserve the autocracy, rather than a genuine move toward empowering the people. In London, exiled critics like Alexander Herzen, often called the father of Russian socialism, used publications to call for a thorough transformation of their homeland. This intellectual frustration eventually turned into violence. Radical groups like the People's Will began a campaign of assassination attempts. viewing the Tsar himself as the primary obstacle to progress. In 1881, just as Alexander was preparing to sign a new set of constitutional reforms, a bomb was thrown at his carriage in St. Petersburg. The Liberator died from his wounds 2 days later. The assassination did not force the state to adopt the radicals' vision. Instead, the government responded by scrapping the planned reforms and tightening its grip on public life. In 1881, the death of Alexander II only confirmed for the next Tsar that liberalization led directly to violence, effectively ending the